Good evening, everybody. It's 6:30, so we'll make a start. And can I first start by alerting you to the fact of the fire evacuation proceedings, as always, that there are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarms sound, whatever they sound like, please evacuate the buildings immediately. The exits are at the end of the building there and the end of the building over here. And then we all rush out down the stairs and meet in War Memorial Park. But we rush out in an orderly fashion, looking after those who are less able to rush than others. Let's make sure I get myself at the front of that. Can I secondly draw your attention to the fact that the meeting is being webcast, and therefore the proceedings are available for others to watch on the internet should they so wish. Apologies for absence, we have none. Declarations of interest? Councillor Finney?
I have a non-pecuniary interest on paper E in respect of the Ample Trust.
Thank you. And Councillor Still?
Thank you. Really, I just wanted to remind the Cabinet that I am a county councillor, but I have no budgetary responsibilities there.
And Councillor Aegis?
I have a personal and pecuniary interest on one of the items on paper E, so if that specifically comes up, I will leave the room.
Thank you. I can say, members of the public, unless you wish to participate now before we get on to the other items, I was going to take each one as it comes throughout the course of it, and we'll try and move the papers around so that those on which there are no speakers come later on in the agenda, if that's agreeable to everybody. So can I confirm the minutes of the last meeting? Are we happy? And I'll sign those later on. There are no urgent items, no referrals from full council, no reports from other committees at this stage. Now, in that context, the agenda which was originally published had an item 16 on it, which was a key decision on the forward plans and on the suggested sites and locations for development in the emerging local plan. That item is now not to be discussed this evening because the Planning and Infrastructure Committee are still in the midst of their deliberations, and clearly it would be inappropriate for Cabinet to be making any consideration of that item without knowing the results of the deliberations of that committee. At the moment we have a date penciled in for the 12th of February for that. It will of course depend upon whether they finish their deliberations this Thursday or not, and indeed of course what comes out of those deliberations, but that is the provisional date for that item to be considered. So let us move on, if we may, and to the council plan, which is paper B for everybody. Now we have one speaker, Mr. Beavers, for that, if you would like to come forward and take one of those seats there. And while you're doing so, I will ask Councillor Jayawardena to introduce the plan.
Thank you, Leader. This council plan is an ambitious document to set a 4-year vision for our borough. Planning for the future is critical, and it is critical both in terms of big strategic projects that this borough council wants to undertake, like revitalising the top of town, regenerating Basingview, transforming the leisure park, but also in terms of providing services that people rely on a day-to-day basis. We believe that this council plan balances these priorities in an uncertain economic climate. It listens to what local residents have said, and we have conducted a full, thorough consultation on this document. The responses have been broadly positive and supportive of the plans and priorities, and therefore I'm pleased that we are able to put forward this council plan this evening. I would draw reference to point 6.4 on page 26, which details some of the financial changes we've made, having listened to local residents. We have created a community support fund to ensure that we're providing additional support to the most vulnerable. We've added £500,000 extra to the parking and access capital programme, so taking that to a £1.1 million programme in the years ahead. And we've also committed £1 million to green investment opportunities to ensure that we are continuing to take the initiative on projects that make our borough greener, but also continue to look after taxpayers' money. With that said, Leader, I move that this council plan be recommended to council.
Thank you very much. Mr. Beavers, you have 2 minutes, theoretically. If you can be succinct, I can be lenient.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, Paul Beavers, Old Down and Beggarwood Wildlife Group again. Firstly, we welcome the recommendation that the Council have a priority for biodiversity, and our group very much look forward to seeing it translated into action. The final Council plan, when describing biodiversity, uses the word protect to describe the Council priority. The Old Down and Beggarwood Wildlife Group proposed at the very least that the statement should be expanded to read protect, restore, reconnect and expand, and some more other things which are less important. In section 4.10 of the Officer report, it says suggested amendments to wording in relation to biodiversity should be addressed through the review of the Green Infrastructure Strategy, which is due for endorsement in spring 2013. We do not understand why the Green Infrastructure Strategy should be included as a priority of the Council. The GI surely should be guidelines for delivering elements of the biodiversity priority. The wording of priorities is important, not least for public confidence and understanding. The green infrastructure is already delayed and should not be seen as a kind of dependent gateway. GI strategy will not make anything happen. If Council has serious intent to reverse losses, we need a priority that people can identify with and states what will drive objectives. Hence, the words protect, restore, reconnect and expand makes that priority clearer. It is consistent with the aims of living landscapes and with national policies. We would expect the Wildlife Trust to have requested much the same. Leaving aside the development planning approach to protect biodiversity to one side, how will the present phrasing be interpreted by councillors and officers? And that's one of our fears if it remains the same. It can be interpreted as meaning no active management and leaving sites to their own devices, and that won't work. Facilitates decisions not to take any meaningful steps towards improvement of existing or new sites in poor condition, which we would hate to see. And it leaves out opportunities for formal encouragement of minimal or no cost restoration, such as letting wildflowers grow through the summer on regularly cut grass, or for hedgerows to be left uncut for 2 or 3 years. These opportunities are plentiful, but there is no visibility of what is happening on that. So please amend the Council plan to read protect, restore, reconnect and expand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beavers. You could have gone on for ages because I suddenly realised this thing isn't working. So it's, it doesn't matter. You did it very well. I think I'm going to pass this one across to Councillor Donnell, since this comes really very much in his area to respond, or the plan, this part of the plan does.
Thank you, Leader. First of all, I want to pay tribute to the work that Paul does and his group does. He is a valuable resource, and his group is a valuable resource to both of us councillors and the officers, with your expertise and your knowledge and, frankly, your passion about the subject. So a thank you from myself and the rest of the Cabinet. I actually have a huge amount of sympathy in what you're saying. We all do around this table, and we've already discussed this matter. So your words are falling on ears that are very, very responsive. We do believe that we need to protect, improve our biodiversity across the borough, and I think we're making great strides towards that as a council. Simple things that we're doing, like the changing of our cutting patterns on some of the grass to let the biodiversity grey, the retraining of some of our street cleaning and our operatives in order that they can improve it. These are small things, but they're actually small things that have a huge impact around the patch. So I am very happy to propose to Cabinet a slight amendment to the council plan. I think it's in line with what our residents want, but also what we've spoken about before. And I would suggest that we, third bullet point in protecting our environment, is changed to read: protect, restore, reconnect and expand biodiversity and the rural nature of our borough through better management of our woodlands, parks and open spaces, and the introduction of a new green infrastructure and the implementation of the green infrastructure strategy. Paul makes a very valid point. Having a strategy is like having a chocolate teapot. It looks very nice and is absolutely pointless if it's not implemented. The important thing is not to have the strategy, it's actually to do it, and actually to have action and take action in doing it. And I think those words better reflect what this council plans are and what we have said as a cabinet. Leader, I'd like to come back later and speak a little bit more about the environmental aspects of the council plan as well.
I'd like to second that.
I was first of all going to ask Mr. Pierce if he had a supplementary question he wanted to ask. That's fine, thank you. I will take your seconding part. Did you want? Does anybody else wish to contribute to this debate apart from Councillor Donnell? And you leave you to carry on for a second.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to pick up Councillor Ger Wardener's point around the 1 million green investment. I think this is something quite radical for this council. It is something that builds upon our policy of putting the photovoltaic panels on our buildings, and it's all about using our money sensibly for the benefit of our residents and the environment, but doing it in a sensible way which actually gets real action.
Thank you. Then, Councillor Jai-Wood, do you want to sum up?
Thank you, Leader. I'm very pleased to accept that amendment that's been proposed by Mr. Beavers and Councillor Donnell. And I think that this demonstrates the consultation that has been involved in this council plan process. It demonstrates, as does the allocations to the 3 areas of funding that I referred to earlier, that we have listened to what local people want, and the council plan does create a clear direction of travel to improve our borough for the years ahead, while of course at the same time freezing our council tax yet again to benefit residents, as Councillor Donnell rightly pointed out, in terms of using our investments very carefully. So I move that this council plan, as amended, is recommended to council.
We agreed? Agreed. Good. Thank you very much. Then let us move on to the second item, which is paper C, the proposals for the policy and budget framework. And on this, Councillor Keating, you wish to speak, I believe, and while you're coming forward, I will ask Councillor Isaacs to introduce it.
I've got effectively 3 points I wanted to make, which are totally separate to the budget. Would you allow me to make at least 1 or 2 of them now, before the budget bit come in?
Please go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Let me just say that if we haven't got, I mean, the time we're going to have to work out, but I have actually used my wonderful new modern device here, which is a watch. Yes. I don't own a watch actually, but I do have a phone, so I can at least keep a time. And I will try and ask you to be as succinct as you can. Thank you.
The first point I wanted to make arose out of what I've just witnessed tonight. The Local Government 2000 Act introduced the concept of cabinet and government and all that kind of thing. And it specifically requires people to identify conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest. It doesn't say, tell us that you've got a conflict and then don't tell us what it's about. It says, if you identify you have a conflict of interest or a potential conflict of interest, you have to identify what it is, not I'll tell you later. So I really do want to say to, I think it was Councillor Eaches, who identified that she had a declaration of interest. I'm sorry, I don't mean conflict of interest. Declaration that she had a declaration of interest, but she'll tell us later. I believe it has to be at the time. Thank you.
Can I just, I think, yes, and I think she did actually state that it was because she has a client. Did you not? I thought you did.
But it's irrelevant. It doesn't.
Oh, okay. It's a private.
I said it was a personal and pecuniary interest,
Yeah.
and I haven't identified exactly which person because it's confidential, as in.
Yeah. And I think if she takes the appropriate action, that's perfectly acceptable.
My role in life as a councillor is to hold you to account. That's my job. And if you're going to say, I've got a conflict of interest, but I won't tell you what it is, or in relation to what, it's a pointless exercise.
I think we'll ask us. I will think about it, but I will ask the Chief Executive if he wishes to give us any guidance on this particular point. But my view is that if you withdraw from the proceedings, if you think it appropriate to do so, then there's no reason why you have to declare what reason you are withdrawing for.
And there's a register of interest.
Broadly, I concur, Leader. As I understood it, Councillor Eachus indicated that if a matter came up, which was the subject of what would be to declare an interest, Councillor Eachus would leave the meeting and not take any part in the proceedings. That seems, on the basis of the information before me, a totally reasonable position to take.
I think we've made our points clear. Would you like to make your second point?
Thank you, Chair. The second point I wanted to make arises from the report, in that the report that we're talking about, item C, identifies a subsidy to the anvil, which is it's just over £1 million and it's annual. What it doesn't identify in the same respect is how much the rent subsidy is. Now, if you're doing accounts and if you're doing accounting and you're providing a rent subsidy of a substantive nature, then I believe that it is significant that the rent subsidy should be itemized in value terms. I'm not taking a position about should it be subsidized or otherwise. The position I'm talking about now is, again, doing things properly and open and honestly and upfront, and I believe a rent subsidy of a substantial nature, of this nature, should be clearly identified within the accounts and within the budget framework. That's the second point I want to make, Mr. Chair.
I think since that actually relates to the paper which we're about to discuss, we'll take that comment as part of the discussion on that. Did you have a third point?
Yes, I do.
While you're there and while you're in full flow.
Thank you very much. The third point relates to Hampshire County Council and whether or not you have a declared interest. The reality is that the county councillors on this cabinet are and will be making regular decisions in relation to the level of subsidy that we provide to Hampshire County Council operations. For example, the Hampshire County Council subsidy, Hampshire County Council pay for and should pay for the milestones, whereas we subsidise it significantly. Hampshire County Council determines how much they put in and then we subsidise. So anyone here who's a member in the cabinet who has an input into Hampshire County Council ought to declare that interest, and I would suggest shouldn't vote on it. That's the point in principle I'm talking about. I have a separate point about the detail of that. Thank you.
Again, I think Councillor Mrs. Still did declare that she was a member of Hampshire County Council. Obviously, whether she votes on it is a matter for her own personal decision to make on that particular item, and how she chooses to act accordingly. But she has been very clear in making it clear for everybody to know that she is a county councillor, which is the only person that this actually affects around the table. I think we should also make that clear, that none of the rest of us are. Yes, but not necessarily everybody in the public does, who may be watching. Okay.
If I might make my separate additional point on that issue?
This is point 3A, B, or whatever it is.
Call it what you want.
Right.
Until 2 years ago, Basingstoke Borough Council religiously got a request to subsidise the Milestones Museum. And whether one agreed with it or not, we did. Last year, for a change, we had two things happen. We gave a one-off contribution following a request from Hampshire County Council to Basing House. We have a one-off contribution. Then, now we've got Hampshire County Council changing the rules. Now we've got Hampshire County Council saying it's Milestones and Basing House is one item. They actually are two items, and they should be retained as two items, because the subsidy that we give now, the subsidy that we now give to Hampshire County Council for the Milestones and Basing House confuses deliberately the numbers of people visiting, why they're visiting, how much they're paying. And I believe that confusion is deliberate and should be resisted, and the two issues should be separate and retained separately in our accounts. Thank you.
Is your final?
The main point I'm here for, actually, is the next one.
The next one. Right. Why don't you just carry on? Let's get them all out on the table, and then we know where we're going.
Yeah, all this is as a consequence of being on the Standards Committee, being on the Economic Committee, being on the ARGA Committee. If you see things going wrong or people confusing things deliberately, then you have to say. Two, as a member of the Economic Committee, last week or the week before, I can't remember which, was certainly the most recent one, at which this particular document tonight was being discussed. As you will appreciate, there are lots of things in this document tonight, all to do with money. But the significant thing that was raised and commented on by a large number of people on the Economic Committee was the proposed cut to the CAB subsidy. The proposed cut to the CAB is 5%. Now, I'm not suggesting it's not a smaller cut than others, we know that. But the CAB this year is now facing a huge and increasing risk in terms of how they can service people. There are approximately 2,000 social housing tenants in Southampton. So it's a large number, very large number. We have in Council Chamber dealt with the proposed reduction in council tax rebate to people, and that's been overturned in the full council. But that was intended and would have impacted on people for small bits of money, day after day, week after week. In the immediate future, there will be similar but larger cuts in housing benefit. There will be an additional impact on people because of the government's bedroom tax, the proposed bedroom tax. Now, I'm not saying this is a government-inspired decision, but the reality, it is a government action to pay benefit to people direct rather than to their landlord. I'm talking about the rent bit. That's going to cause significant issues. And finally, this year, the universal credit. All of those will impact on people's ability to pay their bills, manage their money, pay their rent, and keep themselves in housing. Two biggest housing associations in this borough, Sentinel and Sovereign, are both exceptionally concerned about the potential increase in difficulties that people may encounter. Against that unique number of changes, CAB and other people who deal with social housing in total significantly expect huge increase in issues with arrears. So I believe it is not the time to cut the subsidy to CAB. Now, I've had an informal off-the-record chat with Councillor Gerard Wardener, and I thank him for that. And he has indicated that he has a view that the social community fund that has £500,000 in it, or will have £500,000 in it, when we just write a cheque, that would be the mechanism by which CAB would be reimbursed. As I've said to him in an email, actions speak louder than words, and in my view, the actions that we should be taking tonight is to say to CAB, we won't cut your benefit tonight, not benefit, subsidy tonight, and we recognise that you may well have a significant impact on your demand over the coming year, and I do mean this calendar year, and you may come back to us if you need to. So I urge you to reconsider the cut in the first place, and to give them more than a hope, but a promise that we will help them out as they encounter the greater difficulties. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm finally going to allow Councillor Isaac to introduce the paper, and having taken note of it, and then we will try and answer at least some of the points which were raised during the course of the your speech. Councillor Isaac.
Thank you, Leader. This paper relates to the 2013-14 budget, and it recommends for Council approval on the 7th of February 2013 a balanced revenue budget for 2013 and 14, and a capital programme that takes us from 2012-13 to 2016/17. The report contains a lot of detail, but so I'm only going to, at this point, make some highlight comments, but in general it provides the Chief Financial Officer's statutory statements to the Council on the robustness of the estimates, adequacy of reserves, estimate of the business rate income for the new business rate retention scheme, and sets out the formal 2013-14 Council tax resolution. In terms of key points, I draw your attention to a proposed net revenue budget to be met by council taxpayers for 2014 of £6.293 million. This means that we have a Band D council tax requirement for the borough of £104.44, which represents no increase on the 2012-13 level. We're also proposing there'll be no increase in 2013-14, so I think that will be 4 years of no council tax increases. 5, is it? Oh, well, I understand. 5. Good. I'm glad to be wrong on that point, actually. The proposed budget also includes the allocation of £1.836 million of new one-off funding in support of our key council plan priorities, including an allocation of £500,000 to create a community support fund, With regard to the capital programme for 2012-13 to 2016-17, that's 31.615 million and includes additions to the capital programme of 10.609 million, including a further allocation of 500,000 for the parking and access rolling capital programme. This is fully funded out of our own resources, no external borrowing. We've also earmarked a reserve of £1 million to fund green investments. So I'm delighted that we're able to take that sort of initiative, which is important and is born of the prudent husbanding of our resources over the years. In terms of the precise recommendations, it's recommended that the Cabinet agrees that £42,000 of new burdens grant income from the DCLG towards the set-up costs for the new council tax scheme is carried forward from 2012 to 13 and built into the 2013/14 budget. The council be recommended to approve the fees and charges for 2013/14, the net council tax requirement of 6.293 million, the capital programme, the requirement for council tax for borough purposes of £104.44p Band D equivalent, and the 2013 budget for the Joint Money-Down Committee, plus other technical points which I won't go into. And to finish, the council will be recommended to note the Chief Financial Officer's statutory report regarding the robustness of the estimates and the adequacy of the reserves detailed in the report. Sorry? Yes, it's it.
Thank you. Press them up. There we go. Nothing's working this end. Do you wish to address the point that was raised by on the anvil at this stage, or do you wish to provide a written answer?
No, I'm happy to answer as far as I can. Obviously, it is a point of detail. I'm aware of it. I wouldn't expect that to appear in this paper, but I'm confident that in our accountants, our auditors will have reflected the fact that there is a rental subsidy given, and I would expect that to have appeared in our published reports. But if it isn't, then I shall inquire about it and find out. Yeah, and find out. Yes, yeah. So I've no problem with the point you're making.
Good, thank you for that. Then, Councillor, Mr. Still, do you, on the milestones and Basing House, this falls within your portfolio. Do you have anything you wish to add to the discussion? I was a bit confused when you were talking about the numbers. Were you talking about those attending, both of them, or were you talking about other numbers?
I was talking about the potential to mix up the numbers attending to justify more funding.
I'm not sure that is the case, so I have nothing to add to that.
But in principle, we wouldn't. I mean, I would agree with you that it's useful to know, yes, where you know, what you get for your money, or what other people are getting.
Especially since the cabinet member before was a county councillor and dealt with this.
Yes, that's no longer the case. So at least we have a degree of separation there now. Fine. We come then to your point on the CAB, which really we probably should have taken under the paper E on discretionary grant funding. So if we may, I'm going to park that one for the moment and let us, we'll just conclude our discussions on this paper. I'm then going to move on to paper E because there are other speakers who wish to contribute to that, and we'll deal with it at that stage. Go where? Do you want to retreat? Yes, that would be very kind. Thank you. If yes, you will. Turn this on. Let us just. I think the only point which I would add to those made by Councillor Isaac is that whilst there is clearly going to be a great deal of uncertainty and potential difficulty for people during the transition of all the various benefits and other credits that Councillor Keating was mentioning, I think we should also be aware that there is a tremendous amount of change and potential risk in the financing that the council receives, particularly in view of the changes to the use of business rate and the retention of business rate. Therefore, in putting together this budget, it has been necessary to ensure that we have provided adequate risk reserves, because, quite frankly, we don't know what the ultimate impact is likely to be, but we are talking about quite significant amounts of money if it was to go the wrong direction. Equally, there is the potential for us to be a beneficiary of the retention of business rates, but it would be very imprudent were we not to have made the necessary risk reserves, which are there for the next couple of years, because it will take a couple of years for this to really bottom out. Nevertheless, what this budget does produce is a balanced budget for the next 2 years, and clearly there will be the potential for some of those risk reserves to be released back at a later stage if they prove not to be required. But they are an essential part of it at the moment, which is why we do not want to go around squandering other parts of reserves. So, if are we all agreed then? Councillor Mrs. Still.
Leader, sorry, I need your guidance. I would like to speak on this, on Basingstoke Live, with the revised decision notice. I've been told it's on paper C. Is that correct?
It is indeed, and you may. So.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
So, for the savings of the £27,000, I want to say to Cabinet, when I took over my new responsibilities in this Cabinet last year, I joined everyone in the mud at Basingstoke Live. I was impressed by the atmosphere and the efforts that our staff, music promoters and volunteers put into staging such a big 2-day event in the park. Over the last few months, I have had to carefully consider the future of this event after growing concerns about antisocial behaviour, meaning its security and crowd management costs need to increase. There were also issues with contracts and arguments for running the event. It is only right that all of us, as Cabinet members, look closely at the budgets we are responsible for, especially where they are growing in cost. To balance our budgets and keep council tax low for our residents, we have to think carefully about spending every penny. The key question I needed to ask was whether the event was meeting a need in our community that couldn't be met more cost effectively in any other way. That question was answered loud and clear, and even with a musical performance at our council offices, people have shown just how passionately they value Basingstoke Live as a chance for the community to get together and a showcase for local performers, and I have listened. This overwhelming level of support, despite the challenges of continuing to run the event, is something that has convinced me that we should find the extra funding needed to run it safely this year. And it's always been about the safety. I am delighted to see how everyone has pulled together, overcoming all the difficulties to get the event up and running again. I'd especially like to thank Councillors Tomlin, Gavin James, Councillor Miss Bean, Councillor Cousins and Councillor West, who worked alongside me on what we call a members advisory panel. We put aside our political differences to do something constructive, and I look forward to this joint effort continuing as we look to the future. And I'd also like to thank the events officers for all their dedicated work. So hopefully Cabinet will agree that we can move forward this year with Basingstoke Live. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to comment on that other than I'm very pleased it's going to go ahead. I've always been a supporter of Basingstoke Live, even though I've never been to it, but I could be the oldest person there probably if I actually made the effort to go. However, it is in danger of becoming a victim of its own success. It's got bigger and bigger, and last year it didn't get bigger, but that was purely because of the rain and the mud, I think, rather than any other reason. And if it again is a tremendous success, which I hope it will be this year, I think the working party, which has been very useful that you've set up so far, has to turn its mind now to what it is going to do for the following year. And we have to bring in additional finance, because at a time when we are being very careful with our money. We cannot just go on augmenting funding for that event year after year. We have to look at whether it's people paying a modest £5 entry. I mean, you can hardly buy a pint of Guinness for £5 these days. So, and there's plenty of that seems to get consumed at the event. So, or whatever it happens to be, or however it happens to be done. But I think you have to make sure that that happens during the course of the year. But that said, there are two particular amendments that we need to make the budget. One was already mentioned by Councillor Isaac, which is the carryover of the new burdens grant income from the DCLG towards the 2013-14 budget. And the other one is the carryover of this funding of the 27,000 from the savings in the 2012-13 budget. But if, as long as we agree that there is that additional decision to be made, we're happy to recommend the budget going forward. Good, thank you very much. Then let us move to paper E, if we may do out of order, because there are two speakers. I don't know from Carla the Arts whether you both wish to speak separately or you're going to do it as a double act, or however you wish to do it. Please feel if you'd like to come forward at this point, and I shall ask Councillor John Wardner to introduce the paper. So we get back to doing it in the normal way we do it, rather than when Councillor Keating arrives. You did. That's true.
Thank you, Leader. These are difficult times, and as we've already heard in the previous two papers, we need to take tough decisions to ensure that this council is on a stable financial footing, can see off the challenges ahead and provide the services that residents really need during these difficult times. That's why we've conducted a full review of the grants that this council provides to local organisations and organisations that provide services to residents in this borough. We have gone out to organisations to find out what their funding needs are, what their plans for the future are, and how they would cope with the reductions if those are required. We set a target of funding reductions of 15%. That is a contribution that we set out to make towards our budget to ensure that we can continue to fund our council tax freeze that benefits every single council taxpayer in this borough. But having gone out to residents, having gone out to organisations, having spoken and engaged with them, we've understood that a 15% cut was not possible. That's why we've put forward a reduction of only 12% overall. But we also have made a clear decision not to salami slice. We have made a clear decision to look at each organisation on their own merits, looking at their own needs and looking at the services they provide to residents. That's why some organisations have received a bigger reduction than others. But an important point to make is that these funding offers are being made as a 2-year package to organisations, providing them with funding stability for the years ahead so that they can plan their businesses going forward, they can plan the services they provide, and they can also make provision to ensure savings are phased in over the coming 2 years. Turning, if I may, very quickly, Leader, to the point that Councillor Keating made. Actions speak louder than words. Those were the words we heard. And that's why I'm pleased to say that I have been to visit the CAB in Basingstoke. I've met with the Chief Executive of the CAB and discussed the needs of residents, the needs of the CAB going forward. It's important to note that we have not reduced their budget as much as other organisations, as I said a moment ago. It's important to remember that they are not the only provider of advice services in this borough. But it's also important to remember that they're often the first point of call, and we must ensure that residents are provided with a service if they need it. That's why, as I said a moment ago in introducing the council plan, we have listened to local residents, we have listened to the organisations, and we have made specific provision through a community support fund. This is a more agile fund that will reflect the short-term needs of residents, focused on the organisations that can provide the right services to residents at this time. The grants that are detailed in this paper are year-on-year grants. Indeed, this is a 2-year package. The fund that we have already announced is agile and responsive to the needs of residents and can be called upon if residents need specific advice that is unmet through organisations due to funding or other needs. It is important to remember that that is a new addition that we have made to the budget. We have listened, but we must take the right decisions now to ensure that the Council is on a stable financial footing in the years ahead. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Fine. It is now your opportunity to speak. As you know, my machine has stopped working, and Councillor Keating would have ignored it anyway, so you might as well do the same as he did. Please.
Good evening, Cabinet, executive officers and guests who are at the back. I would like to introduce myself. I'm Sushmita Patti. Sorry, I've got a croaky voice, so do excuse me. So that's why I've got the water next to me. I'm also the artistic director of the company. And this is one of our directors who's here just to support me and also talk from all his own experience of being with Carla. And this is David Mann. We are here because the recommendation for Carla the Art yet again has been note. And also it's interesting to put our point of view forward to the Cabinet. Some of the members in the Cabinet have already seen Carla's work, but I'm just going to explain a little bit about what sort of Carla does to start with, and then the key points. I shall not take a lot of your time. Carla the Arts is a leading South Asian dance organization based in Basingstoke, as you all know, and we have been operating since 1999. Carla promotes diversity, integration, access, participation, excellence, innovation, and community cohesion through its work. The organization has been instrumental in introducing and developing a high-quality South Asian dance and music locally and committed to bringing in cultural diversity to the borough. A few of you have seen our work, and you know what I'm talking about. For the years 2010 and 11, we have received some project funding from Basingstoke, which has enabled us to employ much-needed staff to do marketing and admin. In return, we increase participation for our projects locally and use this to leverage further funding for high-profile projects and a home for the organization at Milestones, which we have been using for the last 2 years. Currently, this is under serious threat. We will have no funds to pay for accommodation, no staff to carry on with marketing or admin. Also, we have just learned that funding decision made today is recommended to carry over for a second year, making it even harder for us. We have been encouraged to apply for funding every year, and we have made our plans and projects around that. 2 years ago, the new system was brought in to make way for some funding for organizations who had not received any core funding before. However, since its introduction, no organizations have been considered for core project funding in the Tier 3 category. We have been led to believe by the team that the new system will help Carla with funding, and that commitment has not been met by the Council. In the meantime, one organization has also folded. As you can see from the report, and I'm assuming you've already read the report, Carla is delivering against Council priorities, meeting targets, and yet we are recommended for not funding. We have not been offered any real reason why. Despite not being given any funding last year, as we had made our commitments to the borough, we have used our resources to fund Basingstoke Festival for 2 performances, using international, national artists and local artists. These are difficult times, we agree, for all of us, and the funding will at least help us with accommodation and to retain the projects and increase participation levels, which has been in our business plan, and maintain a planned level of work, which is essential. If the funding is not offered, there is a real danger. We will be homeless, which is a serious issue for us. If we cannot continue, there will be a real gap in provision to the borough, as none of the other organizations does the work Carla does. Also, many of the Basingstoke BME community groups from a diverse background and professional venues from the borough look to Carla to deliver the projects and events. There will be less or no opportunities for innovation and high quality South Asian dance practice and music created in Basingstoke for the people, which is premiered here, and then it travels to the other parts of the region, raising the borough's profile. Carla the Arts will be singled out as the only organization within Basingstoke Cultural Forum to have note funding. We believe we have played a significant role in bringing community cohesion, cultural integration to the borough, but we do not know how we can continue to do this without vital funding, which is much needed. And I do apologize if my voice came across a bit louder because I teach. So sorry, sorry.
Sorry, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I only want to add a small thing, Mr. Chairman. As you've heard from our CEO and Artistic Director, Shamita Pathi of Carla, first, I would like to thank the officers who prepared this report, but I have to say I believe that it's fatally flawed in two regions. The first is that I think that it's unfair to mix the arts with voluntary services, like you're playing one against the other in respect of mobility for old people, the CAB and the arts, which are two different organisations. Also on the 2-year funding cycle, it's great if you get a grant and you know you've got the stability for 2 years, but if you don't get a grant, you've now got to wait 24 months instead of a year until you can reapply for another grant. Now, if Carla was to be given part funding of, say, £15,000, this will make a big significant difference to us. And this is exceedingly small when taken into consideration from other larger organisations that have been given grants. Would allow us to carry on at our base, employ an admin assistant and increase our participation in our education work with disadvantaged children in the borough, which incidentally helps to keep them fit and active. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Councillor Jayawardena.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you to our speakers this evening. This is a difficult issue. I'm not going to pretend it isn't, but I think we must look at this in the round as part of the overall funding settlement. It's important, of course, to remember that Carla didn't receive any funding in 2012-13, this current financial year that we're in, and the recommendation has been made that in 13-14 the same applies. The process has been rigorous, and I think everyone would agree that's been involved with the process that officers have looked very fairly at engaging with organisations. They've looked very fairly at the services that will be provided, the funding that's needed, and whether or not we as a council can afford it. There's ultimately only one council tax. Everyone pays one council tax bill, and therefore there is only one budget. And we must take decisions as to how we spread that budget across the various organisations in the community. Many organisations meet council priorities, and many organisations do excellent work, and some receive funding from the council and some don't. It's important to consider this as part of that settlement. If some organisations are already having a reduction in their grant, and we are to provide increases or new grants to other organisations, then that means that as part of that budget, the balance of organisations have to take an increased reduction. But as part of commissioning, we are continuing to work with all sectors in the community to ensure that we're helping where we can organisations to work more closely together and ensure that they're delivering better value through their businesses and delivering the services that residents need. Commissioning may well mean that in the years ahead, organisations such as Colour the Arts and others receive funding, but maybe not directly from the council. Maybe it will be as part of a consortium. But this is a work in progress, and the commissioning process is only just beginning. I'm very happy for officers to meet with you and discuss in more detail the reasons why on this occasion you did not receive funding. But I would recommend to Cabinet that the funding settlement should remain as it is, on the basis that these are very difficult decisions we've had to make. There are other organisations that also bid for money and were unable to receive any under what's proposed. And that's because we've had to balance all of the needs of the community, all of the needs of the organisations in arriving at a conclusion.
Would you like to a supplementary question or make a further point?
The only point I'd like to make to that is that apparently some organisations within the borough are getting a lot of money, and the little organisations at the bottom are getting nothing. And what's happening is that the diversity within the borough for the arts is disappearing slowly because of lack of funding.
Thank you, Leader. I would counter that. I would say that is not true, and I would say we are committed to arts and ensuring that arts provision is provided in this borough. And yes, it is true that we provide funding to larger organisations such as Anvil Arts that do excellent work through the Anvil, the Haymarket and the Forge, but we also provide funding to Central Studio, to Proteus, to Fairfields and others. So we do provide funding to smaller organisations. But we've had to take difficult decisions in arriving at the conclusion we have. And on this occasion, Carl of the Arts is one of the organisations that did not receive funding.
Thank you both. One last thing then. Yeah.
I would like to just make a point. We have been encouraged to apply for funding. The process takes a long time. We are a very small organization. And I think that commitment at least should be there to say the time you have spent even writing that application purely because you are a Basingstoke organization. I am not saying this myself. Officers say it. And we have worked with the officers over the years doing our business plan. So it's not a new organization which has come into the picture. We have been working for Basingstoke for a very long time. And I think that sort of those issues are very, very important because we have no answers to why are we invited to apply for this funding when everybody knows it just is, obviously the money isn't there, or, nobody is going to be making a recommendation. And even when I picked up the paper today, the Observer, Carl of the Arts was there. So the Basingstoke Festival is advertising Carl of the Arts. So I'm assuming they like our work, and yet no funding has been offered, even partial funding. Thank you.
Thank you. One last one because I need to.
Thank you, Leader. All I'd say is that all organisations are always welcome to apply for funding, and we will always look very closely at every application that is made. I will, however, take back your feedback in terms of streamlining the process so that it doesn't take so much time for smaller organisations to apply for funding wherever we can do that in the years ahead as we move through the commissioning process.
Thank you both. Councillor Keating, did you want to come back with a supplementary? You did ask if it would be possible later on, or are you happy with the answers that you received to the various points that you raised earlier? Don't feel you have to.
But at least I do address issues. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to come back. I'd like to make just one sentence of comment in relation to the milestone of Basic House. I think we should go back to having them as two separate items on the budget line. That's what they were, that's what they should be. And in terms of the cuts to the CAB, I understood what you said. But if in the year when the poorest of people have reductions in the council tax, reduction in housing benefit, an imposition of a bedroom tax, universal credit, which is going to impact on some, not a lot, I know, and the direct payment to individual. If in that 1 year you can justify a cut to the support for CAB, then I dread next year.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, that was the question.
Right. I think the point has already been very fully answered, that money is there and may well find its way to the CAB to perform specific functions to deal with a lot of problems which may arise during the transition to new arrangements. And that is exactly and specifically why that has been put in place. But it is a much more flexible method of dealing with it, to do it in the way one is suggesting, whilst at the same time recognising that all organisations have a need to look at the way they are structured and to ensure that they optimise their effectiveness. And that is what this reduction in grant does, in the same way that we as a council have reduced our expenditure and reduced our costs over a long period now. We would expect all those with whom we work to do the same, and indeed the CAB has agreed that it can do that, because this 5% cut has been the result of those changes. So we take on board all the points you were making, and that was actually why the £500,000 has been provided. Thank you. Okay, members.
Thank you.
Yes, I was going to say, I was about to say, would you, is there anybody else who wishes to participate?
Yes, I do, because particularly in view of what Shasmita has said, I as a councillor who has experienced the work of Carla the Arts, both in secondary and primary schools when I was a councillor in Winklebury, I've seen them perform at the Haymarket. I saw them last year at the World Party in the Park, and I am very, very impressed with the work they do. And in happier times, and I know there are others around this table, would have very happily voted money to support you. I hadn't had a chance to think before you said it tonight about the 2-year problem. So I know we're encouraging you that there will be commissioning, this will allow you to rethink. Please don't just go away for 2 years. Don't spend a lot of time filling in lots more forms either. Just keep in touch with us, because there is a lot of sympathy around this table for what you're doing, and we are sorry that we didn't feel we could vote any money to you this year. But this is definitely not meant to be a door being closed in your face.
I think there's quite a few of us would agree with that sentiment. Any other points? Did you wish to make any points at all, Councillor Still? Then by all means you can withdraw or whatever, and so should you as well. Yeah. And then come back. So as soon as they've gone out of the room, we can now. No, you don't need to leave, but you can choose whether you wish to vote. No, we're still for it. So, are we happy to agree paper E? Agreed. Good. And the recommendation that goes with it. Then perhaps we could tell them to come back in again now, and we will go back to the order of the budget, which takes us back to item 3 on the agenda, the Treasury Management Strategy. Councillor Isaac. Normally find at this stage that people get up and leave.
This is riveting. But thank you, Leader. This report sets out the proposed Treasury Management Policy and Strategy for 2013-14. To put it in context, the Council is investing on behalf of its residents something in the order of £138 million at the beginning of 2013-14. What this paper is proposing is that we relook at the parameters of where we invest this money that we have in the money markets. There's going to be no departure, however, from the long-standing objectives of the Council to continue to invest prudently, having regard to both security and liquidity, and the predictability of returns, so that we achieve the optimum return. Clearly, over the last few years, investing in the conventional products such as government gilts and the banks has produced is producing low returns, historically low returns, with low interest rates, low yields on government bonds. We've had an annual review of the investment strategy, which was carried out by our independent financial advisors during November 2012. This review concluded that the Council continues to score well in comparison with other councils in the main areas of security, liquidity and return. However, the report pointed out that the current delivery methodology which has served the Council well over the last 7 years, needs to be reviewed. So a completely separate review will be coming to the Cabinet in February, looking at alternative delivery strategies and investment types. But in preparation for that, the Treasury Management Strategy needs to set out new proposed parameters. So these cover new investment strategy limits in terms of types of investments and the limits of individual investments in any one category, and these are set out in the paper. So in terms of the recommendations, Cabinet recommendations to Council to approve, these are the Treasury Management Policy Statement, the Treasury Management Strategy for 2013/14, which includes the Annual Investment Strategy for 2013-14, the Prudential Indicators for 2012-13 to 2015-16, and the authorised limit for external debt of £50 million for 2013/14.
Yes, and I'm not going to repeat that. It wasn't a very good joke, so we won't bother. I apologise for not turning the microphone on. If we're all agreed, then agreed. Good, that's fine. We'll move on to item 4 on the agenda: neighbourhood planning. The proposed recommendation from Councillor Sherlock on the way forward for neighbourhood planning. Councillor Sherlock, do you want to take paper F? This is.
Paper F.
Paper F, which can also be taken in conjunction with item 15, neighbourhood planning. Paper F.
This paper, Leader, thank you, is the passport of the first tranche of £5,000 given by the government for the neighbourhood plan for local communities, and the intention is that we pass it straight on to them for the local community to use to set the plans up. And the second part is the delegation of the portfolio holder's power to designate a neighbourhood area and delegate the power to the portfolio holder in association with the local ward councillors to organise a referendum for the plan. That's it.
Thank you very much. Does anybody, could you extinguish your, any points, Councillor Jayawardena?
Leader, as a ward member, I'd just like to welcome this. I think it's really excellent work to consider the implications of localising planning where it is possible, and enabling local groups such as parish councils to get on and decide how they want their area to grow in the years ahead. So I just wanted to be on the record in congratulating officers on bringing this work forward, and on the portfolio holder for recommending it this evening.
Thank you very much. I think it is interesting how neighbourhood planning, having been something which everybody nodded about and then did sort of put into a drawer and hoped they never have to take it out, is now becoming a significant issue. I was at the meeting last night, as was Councillor Mrs. Still, of the parish councils. And again, it was an issue which they raised as being something which they saw as being a useful tool going forward, in really ensuring that their local communities have a say in what happens in planning. So I think it should be encouraged, though nobody should underestimate the amount of work that it requires local people to do to make it actually happen. And it is not an easy process by any means, and it is very labour intensive and requires commitment over a prolonged period, but it is worth it if you can stick it through. So are we happy therefore to accept the recommendation as per item 4 and also as per the decision of the under item 15? Agreed? Good, thank you very much. Then the other items have already been dealt with. That's items 13 and 14 have already been picked up on our way through, which leaves us only with item 17, matters dealt with under delegated powers for noting.
Leader, I should just point out that decision 75/2012 has not been yet taken forward because the work is being reviewed following consultation.
Thank you very much. I was unaware that it hadn't actually been taken forward, so we shall strike through that one for the time being and note it at a later stage. Good. That being the case, having put something off for a while, we can draw the meeting to a close. Thank you all very much.